Hi there, my name is Matthew Carson with the Open Source Energy Network. We're very excited to be bringing these testimonies before you today, but first of all we'd like to thank the Disclosure Project. The Disclosure Project has spent a couple years and over $250,000 acquiring these exceptional energy testimonies from trailblazers in the clean, free, renewable energy field. These testimonies are testimonies. They aren't simply interviews. They have been documented with affidavits and documented credentials. These people have important things to say about the current state of energy as it is in the world today. Please listen carefully, watch carefully, share these videos, disperse them amongst your friends, email the links around, but make sure to donate directly to the Disclosure Project today, and keep in mind that these are not fictional interviews or showbiz articles. These are testimonies that we hope, and the Disclosure Project hopes, will eventually stand in a court of law. Thank you.
Ted Loder, and I'm a professor of earth sciences and the Institute for the Study of Earth, Oceans, and Space at the University of New Hampshire. I've been there since 1972. I'm professionally an oceanographer and mostly dealing with the chemical aspects of the oceans and the coastal zone. So it wasn't until about almost 4 years ago that I was talking to my cousin, Steve Lovekin, who's now I can't think of his... Brigadier General in the Army Reserves. He's a lawyer in North Carolina. And I was talking to my first cousin. He and I were very close as children, but we got away from each other for many, many years. He was in North Carolina. I was in various parts of New England, what have you, and we got away from each other. But about 4 years ago, he and I had been talking, and he told me that he had been to some meeting on the West Coast with some astronauts and Russian astronauts and what have you. And I said, Steve, what's this about astronauts you were talking to? And he flips out this card on the table that was the card of a Russian astronaut, English on one side, Russian on the other. And he looked at me and he said, Ted, did you ever hear of Area 51, the Roswell? No, he said, did you ever hear of the Roswell? Just Roswell. And I said, of course, everybody's heard of Roswell. At that time, probably everybody hadn't, but I certainly had. And he said, well, it was real. And I said, oh, really? Tell me more. And so we spent the next 3 days in intense conversations. I could barely sleep at night, frankly. When my cousin sat there and told me the things that he had known, the people he'd talked to, and everything else, and he was in the White House during Eisenhower's administration. He had top secret clearance, and he was in cryptography. He worked on Project Blue Book for a period of time. He saw material from the Roswell crash, and he had no reason to lie to me at all. He was my cousin. I mean, we're best friends for all of our childhood, and it just no reason at all. And all this, he told me all this, and so I didn't have to go through the long doubting period that most people do. Here was somebody who was an inside person telling me this stuff was real. So within a matter of probably hours or something, I was absolutely convinced that what he was telling me was real, and now I had to sort of sort it out. And I spent, during those first few nights when I was there, I must admit, I spent a lot of time at night lying in bed saying, oh my God, it's real. What are the implications? In other words, I didn't get hung up on the real stuff. I said, what are the implications? If this is real, then therefore that, etc. And so I realized even at that time that if this is real, this is probably the single most important thing on this planet today. And the depressing thing is that they're already available. There is already knowledge of how these things function, and it's not available to our society. And that has me extremely annoyed, not so much from a personal point of view, but from a societal point of view. And I was flying down on the airplane just today, and sitting there in this airplane thinking about, here we are flying on this fossil fuel driven device using technology that's just an extension of the Wright brothers almost 100 years ago. Within just a couple of years, it's going to be 100 years since we've been driving fossil fuel driven airplanes, and yet the technology I now know has existed for almost 50 years or about 50 years and has probably been usable in terms of a craft for maybe 40, 45 years or maybe 50 years. I don't know exactly when. And here I am still flying in this thing. I'm an oceanographer, and I work with the environment extensively. I teach classes about the environment, at different aspects of the environment. And I realize and I see how much is going on with the environment that doesn't have to go on. So, and I realize that some of the technologies that the ETs, if you will, or the craft represent are technologies that could help us. They can also be used for defense purposes or military purposes as well. But like the old saying goes, a knife can cut or it can spread butter. The same holds with technology, and there's no, it's ridiculous to hold back the technology. And the depressing thing is that the knowledge of this, which is kind of the single biggest piece of knowledge there is, that we are not alone in the universe, and that we are actually a member of a family of, if you will, nations or peoples throughout the universe, and that we're not alone is amazing. It's gonna alter the way we view ourselves on Earth forevermore. And so that's why I realized this was so incredibly important. And the argument that people can't handle it and all this sort of thing, I don't think it flies at all. I've talked to a lot of people about this, and I've never seen anybody go off the deep end when I've told them what I know. The meeting my cousin was at was, as I understand it, because this is a few years ago we talked about it, but as I understand it, the CSETI group, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence group that Dr. Greer heads, had put together a group of scientists, former astronauts, both and cosmonauts, so they're both American and Russian, and a number of military people and some civilian people who knew that the subject was real. And as I understood it, they had gotten together, held a meeting to discuss the implications of the disclosure of this information and how to get this information out to the world public. And so my cousin was there as one of the witnesses, one of the people who knew the subject was real, knew that Eisenhower knew it was real, because as I understood it, his direct boss at the White House was the one who briefed Eisenhower on what was happening in the UFO field. And my cousin was aware of what was going on. And my cousin had met Eisenhower a number of times and what have you. But I decided that I wouldn't go public, if you will, about this until I saw something that was absolutely in my face, seen by multiple witnesses, and there could be no argument. And it was, that happened for me, and everybody kind of remembers their first time, if you will. It happened for me when I was in Desert Hot Springs in the fall of '97. And there was a group of us, 20-something of us, sitting around in Joshua Tree National Monument.
What kind of group is this?
This is a CSETI training group led by Dr. Greer, and we were out in the field observing and trying to observe and see craft of some sort. And it happened to be a rather full moon, or pretty much of a full moon evening. And I was facing, the moon was off to my right shoulder, and just below the moon there appeared an object like a globe, like a ball, maybe a third to half the diameter of the moon. It just appeared to the left side underneath the moon, and it just traveled from this side of the moon, about like that, over to the other side of the moon, and then just went, it just disappeared. It just turned off. It's as though somebody had turned a light bulb on one side of the moon and then carried across below the moon. So it wasn't in front of the moon, but below the moon, and then turn it off. And I said, I was so excited. I said, wow, did anybody else see that? I'm sort of almost jumping up and down because it was so clear and so obvious to me. And Dr. Greer, luckily he was facing that direction, so he had seen it. And I said, did anybody else see this? And Dr. Greer said, yes. He said, I saw it. Did anybody else see it? And about, I don't know, 5 or 6 people in the group said, yes, I saw it, yes, I saw it. So all sitting on that side where he was. And the implications are manifold. I think one thing it will do, this is maybe